Much Ado About Nothing is a terrific play. It's charming, it's entertaining, the pacing is solid, and it has some beautifully touching moments in it. In this play, we have two of the best characters ever written in a romantic comedy. In fact, it might even be the best romantic comedy ever written. So let's see what love will come out of this hot summer's night and see just why William Shakespeare's Much Ado About Nothing is so good. So just a quick reminder before we get into the play, this is not an extensive plot summary or a theme analysis. Of course, these things can be pretty useful, but they don't really tell us why something is good. I will provide a very, very brief summary of the plot, but that's only necessary so we can actually talk about his characters. Now, I won't recite a lot of passages from the play, but dialogue will be showing up, and when it does, feel free to pause the video, or you could just go with the flow. What I really want you to do after this video, it is to read or reread this play, and I hope that you find as much joy in it as I do. Much Ado About Nothing is a comedy written by William Shakespeare, spanning the years 1598 to 1599. I don't really think that there is more that you need to know about the play, though it might be interesting to know that by the time he wrote this play, he had already written about 8 or so masterpieces. My guess is that the majority, if not vast majority of people that read Shakespeare would consider Much Ado About Nothing to be one of his great masterpieces. But I am a bit unsure about how many people would consider this their favourite Shakespeare play. If you created a poll which collected everyone's favourite Shakespeare plays, I don't think that this one would be in the top 5. This is not a criticism of the play, but it's just that Shakespeare wrote so many other great plays. However, I do think that there are people out there that would consider this play as their favourite Shakespeare play. And if you have this as your favourite Shakespeare play, please write something down in the comment section. Now, more than anything, Much Ado About Nothing is a play which appeals to people who like romantic comedies. In fact, you could almost see this as a precursor to the Western romantic comedy. Even in pretty bad romantic comedies, you can see sort of glimpses of Much Ado About Nothing in them. But the comedies that I'm thinking of which are the closest to Much Ado About Nothing would be perhaps the screwball comedies that were popular in the 1930s and the 1940s. So if you admire film directors like Ernst Lubitsch or Preston Sturges, then Much Ado About Nothing will be right up your alley. So this is the plot of Much Ado About Nothing in a nutshell. Claudio is a soldier and patron of the happy-go-lucky Don Pedro, and Claudio has fallen hopelessly hard for Hero, who is the daughter of the governor Leonato. And it doesn't take long for the wedding date between Claudio and Hero to be set. But of course, villainy is at hand. Don John, the bastard, has recently been beaten on the battlefield by his brother, Don Pedro, and what better way to get revenge on his brother than to slander Hero by claiming that she has in fact cheated on Claudio, cancel the wedding plans between them, embarrassing Don Pedro, to which he can then crawl back to his manhole and snicker self-contentedly at his evil plans. Well, things don't really go to plan. This is, after all, a comedy, so Hero and Claudio really do wind up together, and the whole thing ends with a dance party. So you might be wondering where this all takes place. Well, it takes place in the city of Messina. Well, Shakespeare's Messina. Shakespeare's Messina has about as much in common with the real city on Sicily as Haagen-Dazs ice cream has with Denmark. This play could have been set just about anywhere, in Hyderabad or Hyrule for that matter. One of the things that makes Shakespeare so great is that he focuses on character rather than a plot or extensive world building. His plays could really be set anywhere in the past or the present or the future. Now, personally, I do feel that a fragrant and hot Mediterranean island really serves as a good setting. It has a sort of enchantment to it, particularly if you're reading this play on a very cold winter's day, as I have. While the main plot of Much Ado About Nothing is constructed around Claudio and Hero, there is another couple in the play, and there is absolutely no doubt as to which couple should receive the top billing. Beatrice, who is the best friend to Hero, has a thing going on with Benedict, who is Claudio's friend, and like Claudio is employed as a soldier under Don Pedro. Now, this thing could perhaps best be described as a sort of kinky fetishism, but if we are to replace the safety words and whips with stinging wit and hilarious wordplay, this is a couple who love to hate one another. Leonardo famously describes Beatrice and Benedict as if they are engaged in a merry war with one another. Beatrice is fun-loving and armed to the teeth with jokes and jests, and her primary target, well, the play's only really worthy target of her wit, is Benedict. Of course, Benedict also has a great talent for wit, and it would be a shame if this were to be wasted on the battlefield or on anyone other than Beatrice. It doesn't take long for the merry war to begin. In fact, it begins on the first scene and first act of the play. So Beatrice asks one of Don Pedro's messengers if Benedict has returned from fighting on the front. And what Beatrice says is, "I pray you, is Signor Mountanto returned from the wars or no?" Clear as day, right? So what we have here is indeed a Benedict put down. The key word here is Mountanto, and Mountanto is a maneuver in fencing. So the first implication here is that Benedict hasn't been this brave warrior fighting his enemies on the front, rather he's just been play fighting. However, there is an added meaning to the word Mountanto. Mountanto is an upward stroke, and the similarity to the word mounting is a clear sexual reference. So the implication here is that Benedict really isn't a proper soldier, he's just simply been whoring and horsing around. Now, of course, Benedict is not going to take all this just lying down, and so what we get throughout the play are a series of terrific put-downs and comebacks between Beatrice and Benedict. If you have watched or read a few romantic comedies before, you might start to suspect that this merry war between Beatrice and Benedict might suggest blossoming romantic feelings. And of course, you wouldn't be wrong. What advances the forever war between Beatrice and Benedict is the genius suggestion by Don Pedro that wouldn't it be funny if we could make Beatrice and Benedict really fall in love with each other. And this is the plan. They're going to get Benedict to listen in on a conversation where they're going to make up that Beatrice has confessed her violent, passionate feelings for Benedict. And they're going to do the very same to Beatrice. Don Pedro, you're a bloody legend. Now, before we actually have a look at Beatrice and Benedict, let's just quickly discuss the other characters in the play. Let's start with the lover boy, Claudio. Now, Claudio isn't too interesting of a figure in the play. He's a bit impulsive, he's a bit dishonest, pretty unlikable character. But he does surprise us sometimes, and no more than in the first scene and first act of the play, where he just gives us this absolutely beautiful speech about love. This is a speech where he reveals his love for Hero. Now, what Claudio is saying here is that he's always liked Hero, but being a soldier, he just doesn't have the capacity to love her. But now that he is back from the front, then he is allowing himself these feelings. It just has great imagery and great flow. And when you read this, it's almost hard to think that there is a better way to describe love's triumph over violence. Now, I hate to disappoint you, but this is the best thing that Claudio says throughout the entire play. He does not say anything remotely as good as this again. So what about Claudio's bride-to-be, Hero? Well, Hero doesn't have any interesting speeches, and she doesn't really do very much. I guess that the best thing that you could say about Hero is that she rejects the accusations leveled against her with a nobility. Now, what Hero does show is that some of Shakespeare's characters aren't really interesting in of themselves. They're only interesting actually because of the interest that other characters have in them. So in other words, Hero is interesting for us because she is friends with the beautiful Beatrice. Now, Don Pedro, Claudio's lord, is a bit more of a functional character in the play, whose chief importance is hatching that genius plan that'll make Beatrice and Benedict fall in love with each other. I've always really enjoyed the way that he announces this in the first scene of the second act, in which he says that he wishes to bring Signor Benedict and the Lady Beatrice into a mountain of affection, the one with the other. Now, what is pretty cool here is the connection of the word mountain to mountanto. The implication here is that Don Pedro is going to make them fall madly in love with one another, but there is an innuendo here, of course, and it wouldn't be a Shakespearean comedy without sex jokes, would it? Now, Hero's father, Leonato, is kept out of the spotlight for most of the play until the scene where Hero is brutally dumped by Claudio. When Leonato's feelings of shame and indignation give way to sorrow and anger, you really feel for poor Leonato, and this is actually quite a lovely scene in the play. And his outburst when he is being consoled by one of his attendants, I think, is actually pretty memorable. It's got great imagery in it. Now, Don John the Bastard is a pretty simple but still quite interesting comic villain. He is so sullen and so self-pitying and so over-emotional that he launches into these invectives which have terrific imagery in them, actually. This is mostly found throughout the first act of the play. Now, Don John is far more amusing than the most overtly comic character in the play, and that is the stupid constable Dogberry. So the whole thing about Dogberry is that he just keeps getting words mixed up and is always using the wrong word. Now, this is funny the first time, but it gets really, really irritating, and I just simply do not like this character. It's really irritating because when you read this play, you're really into it, and you just know somewhere around the corner you're just going to get Dogberry, and it's just... Ugh. Now, to be fair, the more I read the play, I can just sort of accept Dogberry for what he is, but I don't like him, and I don't think I will ever like him. He's just not funny. There are a few more bit characters in the play, which I don't really think are worth discussing, but there is actually one character who does sort of manage to keep up with Beatrice and Benedict and their wit, and that is Margaret, who is one of Hero's servants. Now, in one sense, she is the opposite of Dogberry because every scene which has Dogberry in it kind of sucks, whereas every scene that has Margaret in it is pretty fun. There is a terrific scene in the fifth act of the play where Benedict is writing a speech in praise of Beatrice, and he has these hilarious and very dirty back and forth passages with Margaret. I really, really like her character. She's really good. So what makes Much Ado About Nothing a great play should be pretty obvious the first time that you read it. Much Ado About Nothing is a great play because of Beatrice and Benedict. Beatrice and Benedict just beam like two beautiful binary stars, outshining just about everything in their orbit, making all the other characters look like dull little planetoids in comparison. Shakespeare just gives them the best passages in the play, and he affords them with an amount of depth that all the other characters are just lacking. I think that any real discussion about this play just has to center on these two characters. So let's start with Benedict. Benedict might perhaps be the most conventionally attractive male character in a Shakespeare play. Benedict has this irresistible combination of manly bravado with boyish silliness, tender feeling, and keen intelligence. It's very easy to see how anyone, and Beatrice included, could fall in love with a character like Benedict. From the beginning, Benedict presents himself as a sort of swaggering ladies' man whose shtick is that he just rails against love and marriage. And he uses this in his sparring matches with Beatrice, such as the terrific brag in the first scene and first act of the play, when he boasts that all women love him, and it's just that he wishes that he could love them back, but it isn't because he is cold, it's simply that he just doesn't have a heart. There is also some really funny banter when Claudio reveals his crush on Hero and he asks Benedict what he thinks of Hero. Now, what I really like about this passage is that it almost sounds like Benedict is talking her down, but what he is in fact doing is the opposite. He chooses to focus on the physical aspects of Hero, that she is very short and has a shade darker skin than the others in the play. And in his own witty, very verbose way, he's actually saying that she is pretty. But of course, Benedict, he doesn't have a heart, and as such, he cannot find her pretty. So by the end of the first act of the play, we kind of understand how Benedict walks and how he talks. But it's not until the second act of the play where we get a Benedict monologue. So the curtains are pulled back, we focus our telescopes and peep through the windows in anticipation to hope to gain a glimpse of the naked Benedict. Benedict as he truly is. Now, nothing excites the inner voyeur of the Shakespeare fan than the monologue, because this is where we get the characters thinking their innermost thoughts aloud. In my opinion, there are three almost faultless scenes throughout this play, and this is certainly one of them. So the theme of Benedict's first monologue is love and marriage, and what makes it so great is that he is just so unaware of what he is actually saying. So we have Benedict alone in Leonardo's orchard, digesting the news that the marriage date between Claudio and Hero has been set. And we have Benedict, who is perhaps gazing up wistfully against the evening sky, wondering why a man like Claudio, who has made it his thing to rail against love and marriage, could actually fall in love himself. Of course, the funny thing here is that Benedict really believes that he's talking about Claudio and not himself. He is completely unaware that he is actually the star of this rom-com. There is a charming cluelessness to his character here, which really starts to blossom, and it makes him very attractive to the reader. So Benedict continues to contrast the interests of the gruff and macho soldier with the lover until we get some lines that really jump out at us. Benedict is sweetly puzzled about Claudio having fallen in love. His reflection on the power of love to change the hearts of men leads him to the honest question whether he himself, heartless as he may be, could also perhaps fall in love. And our hearts as readers are racing by the time he asks the question, "May I be so converted and see with these eyes?" And Benedict hesitates. Now, I think it would only require the faintest recollection of Beatrice's face or her figure, or even the shape of her earrings, to make his dormant feelings race for a searing love eruption. Nowhere in the play is Benedict more endearing and enchanting than he is at this precise moment. It is here that we actually believe that Benedict's earlier playful boast of being loved by all women might actually be true. In fact, if Beatrice were to peer out into Leonardo's orchard and see Benedict at this very point in time, his silhouette soft and steady against that beautiful Sicilian evening, we can be sure that she would fall in love with him at that instant. But Beatrice does not show, and Benedict simmers down into that absent la-di-da-ness of his. And so Benedict's first monologue ends with him saying that he could never fall in love with a woman unless she were beautiful, rich, virtuous, all those qualities. And if she did not have them, it would not be enough to tempt him. After all that edging, it would be terribly rude of Shakespeare just to leave us hanging and dispel all that beautiful magic that he has created. But in a genius move and aware of how we as readers feel, this is the point in the play where he is going to make Benedict fall in love with Beatrice. This is where Don Pedro, Claudio, and Leonardo are going to enter the scene, and they're going to make Benedict hear their made-up talk about Beatrice's mad passion for Benedict. Now, it's very easy to see this being played out with a farcical tone, shifting from the merry conspirators to the absolutely shocked Benedict. Basically, what Don Pedro and his boys make up is that Beatrice has a mad passion for Benedict, but she could never reveal it to him because Benedict would simply mock her to death. They say that Benedict has some good qualities, yeah, but it's nothing compared to Beatrice, who is basically perfection. He is just simply not worthy of her. And Benedict is then left to digest this hard-hitting revelation in the form of a second monologue. So we can imagine Don Pedro, Claudio, and Leonardo leaving the scene and rolling on the floor with laughter, while Benedict really believes them to be sadly serious. Now, by the time Benedict starts his second monologue, we feel two feelings at once. Of course, we delight in the cheeky plan that has been set. It's absolutely hilarious. But we do also feel for poor Benedict. Benedict has this cool-headed and remarkably soldierly reaction to the events he's hearing. Now, I think it is entirely natural that Benedict's reaction should be one of concern. So this second monologue starts with concern, but it slowly dissipates to allow for a more typical Benedictine reaction to the events. What makes it very interesting first is that Benedict chooses to treat this in the calculated rationality of a soldier. It's almost like he has to now woo Beatrice as if it were his martial duty, a duty to his country. Of course, in this monologue, not even Benedict can hide that he is, quote, horribly in love with her. So the monologue leads the reader through a crescendo of thoughts until we come to that amazing line where Benedict says that the world must be peopled. So maybe Benedict thought that he would probably die on the battlefield before he got to the age where he would settle down. But now he has reached that age, and what better way of rationalizing his thoughts of doing dirty stuff with Beatrice than to couch it in terms of begetting offspring. A few great exchanges and two amazing monologues sort of seals the deal on Benedict. Benedict is an utter delight. Benedict is very rom-com-y. If you watch one of the sophisticated, really good romantic comedies from early Hollywood, then you probably will see a glimpse of Benedict in the male lead, probably even in the female lead. Benedict really is one of the reasons why Much Ado About Nothing is so good. So let me set up a scenario for you. Imagine that you have been invited to a party at your friend's place and you enter the living room. And in this living room, you see a beautiful, radiant woman who is surrounded by men on all sides who are laughing at her jokes and who are utterly charmed by her. That woman is, of course, Beatrice. Now, this impression, while true, does obscure a fact about Beatrice that separates her from Benedict. Of course, you could also see Benedict as being the life of a party. It would be nice if we could treat our lovers as being on the same level as each other. We always feel that sort of injustice when we see a couple who are mismatched either in looks or in intelligence or whatever. But that is how life is, and when you read this play a couple of times, you will see the general unevenness between Beatrice and Benedict emerge. Simply put, Beatrice is the deeper, complex, and more interesting character. She is the greatest character in the play. One telltale sign of this is that Beatrice's banter is far more dense, it's wittier, it's quicker. She always wins in her skirmishes with Benedict. You will find examples of Beatrice's deeper wit throughout the entire play. One example of this is the delightful passage in the play where Beatrice compares the wooing of a suitor with different dances. Now, this is elegantly intelligent. It's Beatrice punning on the dances and referring to different stages of life. So syncopace, your pace is sunk now that you're old. It is unmistakably Beatrice. And as witty and funny as Benedict is, you could not see him coming up with this stuff. Now, unlike Benedict, Beatrice also has this tremendous ability, very daunting for opponents, to sort of latch onto a word that they say and then twist it so it has another meaning. An early instance of this is in her initial Benedict put-down in her exchange with the messenger. So we've got the messenger saying that Benedict is a good soldier to lady, and Beatrice says, and he's a good soldier to a lady, but what is he to a lord? Now this word twisting, if you want to call it that, gives Beatrice the ability to steer the tone and topic of the conversation to her liking. She feels very dominant in a way that Benedict does not. So I think that quite early on in the play, we kind of gather that Beatrice is something else. So just as Don Pedro breaks the story to Benedict about Beatrice's mad passion for him, so does Hero do the very same thing to Beatrice. The previous terrific scenes with the two Benedict monologues really gets our hopes up, because we hope that we will get something just as good. Well, the thing is that we get something which is even better. Now, if the scene with the two Benedict monologues is one of three great scenes in the play, this is the second great scene. It is mind-blowingly good. Now, when Beatrice hears the reports of Benedict's undying love for her under those beautiful bowers of that sweet Mediterranean evening, her reaction is astounding. I'm not quite sure how this would work on the stage. You would need an actress of amazing talent to suggest the revolution of feelings going on in Beatrice at this precise moment. The pregnant pause after Hero leaves the scene conceals probably decades of longing and pain and so many other emotions in Beatrice at this precise point in time. And all this is carefully unfolded to us, the readers, in the form of a poem, a sonnet. Now, this is a straightforward and very measured sonnet, a simple one, but it is absolutely beautiful. This poem details Beatrice's intention to leave behind any feelings of pride and contempt and giving herself permission to be loved by Benedict and to love Benedict back. This is not because of what others say that Benedict deserves, but it is what Beatrice knows in her heart to be true. The poem has this beautiful image of Beatrice as a wild hawk being tamed to the loving hand of a hawker. Now, this is the hawk coming to the hawker out of its own volition. You almost get the feeling that Beatrice has actually seen through Hero's game here. Perhaps she knew that this was coming, and this has given her permission to unfold the corners of her mind, which have been obscured from us. I find this perhaps the most touching scene in the play. Now, unlike Benedict's response to the love revelation, which is very much in tune with what his character would say and think, Beatrice's reaction is almost very un-Beatrice-like. The quick and hotly intelligent Beatrice is also a poet. We are both dumbfounded and unsurprised at the same time. We are unsurprised because we know that there is more to Beatrice's character that has been let on. Now, she is good at the bands, just like Benedict is, but she also is sophisticated, and she's a poet. I mean, what else is she capable of? I can't simply imagine that Shakespeare's just sitting in some dimly lit candled room jotting all this down on a whim. This is what I think. Shakespeare has a paper fortune teller with the name Beatrice written on it, and he is not really writing Beatrice, he is just simply unfolding this paper fortune teller, and this is revealing Beatrice to Shakespeare. I think Shakespeare is just as surprised and delighted by Beatrice as you and I are. So by the time that Beatrice and Benedict are made aware of each other's feelings, we are kind of at the halfway point of the play. Of course, we as readers, we're hungry for more. And what really interests us now is not Don John's treachery. We want more Beatrice and Benedict. We long for our two lovers to finally meet up. So after this, the plot of the play unfolds pretty quickly. The scoundrel Don John and his lackeys trick Don Pedro and Claudio into believing that Hero has been unfaithful. And so we come to the scene at the church where Claudio dumps Hero in this absolutely ruthless manner. And eventually in this scene, everyone leaves except for Beatrice and Benedict. And this is the last great scene of the play. Beatrice is, of course, devastated at what has happened to her friend. Benedict seeks to comfort her, and here we get one of the most touching admissions of love that I think exists. This is Benedict at his most vulnerable and transparent. Look closely and you will see that the "is it not strange" echoes the "is it possible" of Benedict's very first monologue. Now, the old Benedict was very skeptical about his ability to fall in love, and now he is, of course, proved wrong. Now, Benedict is puzzled, but that's because being puzzled is in his nature. But the transformative effects of love are now viewed with a great sense of wonder rather than confusion. There is no posturing here. This is Benedict as he truly is. Only this time, Beatrice is there to witness it. The touching exchanges between the two lovers is tempered by the awful event of what has just happened. Beatrice's response to Benedict is one of tender feeling, agony, and wit. Ever the word twister, Beatrice zeroes in on the double meaning of the word nothing. Of course, she loves Benedict more than anything, and she doesn't love the noun, nothing more than him. It seems as if Beatrice can't help herself at being witty, but it is difficult for even the most witty and intelligent person to bear themselves up after what has happened to their best friend. The last sentence here shows the overwhelming effect of grief. I am sorry for my cousin. A direct admission. This too is Beatrice at her most vulnerable. Now the exchange continues by Benedict swearing by his sword that he loves Beatrice. In my earlier discussion of Claudio and his beautiful speech on love, he implied the incompatibility between the soldier and the lover. Well, what we see here is Benedict professing to combine the two into one. Benedict becomes a warrior, and Beatrice is at once both his superior and his lover. He is a warrior of love. Now, Benedict is perhaps on his knees here, and he is imploring Beatrice for him to do something for her. And in perhaps what is both the most serious and funniest line of the play, Beatrice asks him to kill Claudio. Now, I think that most people at this point will burst out into laughter, and Benedict utters, "Not for the wide world." Poor Benny is really in a bind. Although this is outrageously funny, we know that Beatrice is being perfectly serious here. And I'm not really sure how an actress on stage could convey both of these feelings at the same time. I think for this to be effective on the stage, it has to either be played entirely for laughs or it has to be played completely seriously. Now, I have listened to an audiobook version of this play where this scene was not played for laughs at all, and that worked pretty well. However, I really do believe that only by reading the play can we get the fullest feeling of what Beatrice is trying to convey here. Only in the theatre of the mind can this be both the funniest thing we've ever heard and also be one of the most painful things we've ever heard. We feel these things at the same time. A shocked Benedict continues the exchange, obviously very hesitant at Beatrice's murderous request. Benedict's hesitancy causes Beatrice to launch into a hilarious tirade. Beatrice proclaims if she were a real man, she would bloody well rip Claudio's heart out. Poor Benedict is belittled and entirely emasculated. Benedict is neither a warrior nor a lover. He's nothing. Now, Beatrice, if she could, she would be that warrior of love, but she was born a woman, and unfortunately, she can't be. But Benedict's hesitation breaks, and he submits to Beatrice entirely. Benedict shows himself the true lover and warrior and promises to duel Claudio, presumably to the death. And so ends the last great scene of the play. Is this the greatest rom-com of all time? Now, that is a very subjective question, and there is no lack of some absolutely amazing ones out there. But Much Ado About Nothing, for me, seems to invent and perfect the tropes of the typical rom-com. And through Beatrice, he even goes beyond it. So, yeah, it really is the best rom-com of all time. But what did you think of this play? I would love to know what you think, so please write something in the comment section. And if you like this video, please give the thumbs up. And if you want to hear more about why Shakespeare's plays are so good, please follow the channel. And that's all from me now.